It is finally time for our main event of the evening for the UFC middleweight title, Matt. I'm really looking forward to this fight. We have two incredibly great strikers. Israel Adesanya looking to keep his middleweight title, taking on Paulo the Eraser Costa. And Matt, there's a lot of people right now that are incredibly high on Khamzat Chimaev. I read somewhere on the internet today, there's a possibility that in Chimaev's next fight, he's probably going to highlight a fight night card, which is absolutely insane. He's undefeated. He's only had 3 fights in the UFC. Hold the phone, because there was another middleweight that is still undefeated, and there was a ton of shine around and was kind of like Khamzat Chimaev 1.0, if you want to call him. It's Paulo Costa. And Paulo Costa at this point in his career, 13-0. I remember the guy with the slim shady hair on The Ultimate Fighter Brazil that went in there against Marcio Alessandre and lost the split decision. You remember how that fight went? Because Paulo Costa looked good in the first round, taking the fight to the ground. He was on Alessandre's back. In the second round, trying to take it to the ground. In the third round, Paulo Costa was so tired that he got knocked over by a jab and sent flying and could barely get back up to his feet just because of exhaustion. So he loses that one by split decision. You think this guy is never going to amount to diddly squat in the UFC. Comes in, he's taking on, run-of-the-mill guys. Gareth McLennan in his debut 3.5 years ago. One of Matt's favorite fighters in Olawale Bamboje in the next fight. He gets a knockout win. Then it's Big Rig Johnny Hendricks in a fight where Big Rig never should have been in that fight. That was insane. Great card, UFC 217, but that fight was just silly. Then he fights Uriah Hall in a fight that I know we're going to talk about. So spoiler, that fight's going to come up a lot because Uriah Hall and Israel Adesanya, I'm not saying they're really similar, but Uriah Hall fights long and has quite good kickboxing, and he's never really lived up to his potential like Israel Adesanya does. But Uriah Hall on his best day is certainly a middleweight contender. Look at the first fight that he had against a really tough out in the Moose, and we just have to leave it where it is there. And then again in Costa's last fight against Uriah Hall, Yoel Romero, an all-timer, where Paulo Costa looked amazing. He kept pushing forward. He was just throwing absolute fire. Now you look at Israel Adesanya, also undefeated, former Glory kickboxer, training at a City Kickboxing. He is the 4th City Kickboxing fighter on this card. You got Shane Young, Brad Riddell, you've got Kai Kara-France, and then Adesanya at the top. Eugene Behrman is taken over, just like DJ Khaled. But in this fight, Israel Adesanya, since he's became the champion, since he beat Robert Whittaker, I mean, that fight against Yoel Romero, maybe don't go back and watch that one, because that was not the best version of, it was. I mean, for Adesanya, keeps the title. That's great. I mean, Tyron Woodley kept his title for a long time. People didn't like the way that he fought, but he fought smart. Adesanya fought a smart fight, and he kept his title against a really difficult opponent, whereas Paulo Costa went absolute balls to the wall and threw everything that he could against Yoel Romero and picked up a really good win. Probably should have got a title shot earlier, but just due to injuries and this and that, wasn't able to do it. So in this fight, 2 primary strikers that strike in totally different ways. One guy that, again, throws everything into his shots. He could probably use Trevor Whitman a little bit sometimes, and I'm going to bring that up a little bit later as well. But Matt, I love this fight. It's such a good matchup. Paulo Costa is one of the weirdest people on Twitter. And I have to say that if you've never seen if you've never seen him on Twitter, please go check it out, because it's incredibly strange, quite derogatory, and ultimately mildly entertaining. And he really was pining for this fight. Now he's got it. So overall, I mean, what's your excitement level for this fight?
It's at an 11 out of 10. Just if you didn't know anything about MMA and you saw this fight poster on Fight Circus, it would make sense to you, because you have this one guy who's just really tall and thin, and the other guy looks like he should be in a bodybuilding competition. But Israel Adesanya is just such a high-level striker. And you think, okay, there's not a lot of guys on his level striking in the UFC. It's not like Paulo Costa, some scrub who only throws big punches. He's not kind of that 2002 New York badass, your boy.
There's nothing wrong with
his name. Phil Baroni, thank you. He's not just Phil Baroni who's going to go in there and just throw really hard, kind of get tired, and then we'll see where the fight goes. He's got really good technique, goes to the body a lot, which you don't see in MMA enough nowadays. Because Paulo Costa, his best position is if he can back you up against the cage, he does cut the cage off really well. He doesn't just follow his opponent around. And if he can cut you off, we saw it in the Yoel fight. Now, yes, Yoel was kind of inviting him to sort of push forward, but when he gets you up and he starts throwing those big hooks to the body and then the overhands, it's so overwhelming for the opponent up against the cage that, yeah, Yoel was able to survive, but that guy probably has one of the best chins in MMA history. And we see what happens to everyone else when they kind of eat that onslaught from Paulo Costa. There's really not much they can do. But Adesanya, in all that chaos, I think he will be able to find some openings, because if you have a guy just crashing forward, throwing these big hooks, leaving himself open, I think it's the perfect recipe for Adesanya. Clinch up Anderson Silva, Rich Franklin style, and just start throwing tinies to the body, to the head, elbows. Because Adesanya is an 80-inch reach, I believe, and I think Coast is at 72. So with an 8-inch reach advantage, if you think Uriah Hall is going to have a lot of success with the jab and kind of his longer range weapons, amplify that by 2-3-fold, just because Adesanya technically is on another level from Uriah Hall, who is already a phenomenal striker. Plus, he's got more physical attributes that are going to help him. He's got the reach, he's got the distance, he's got the leg reach. It's going to be a really hard night for Paulo Costa, but if we know anything about Paulo Costa, he's got good cardio, even though he's super huge and has a lot of muscle, which is kind of counterintuitive. He can throw a really high volume and keep that pace for a while. So both guys' strengths play into the other one's weaknesses, and that's why I'm so excited for this fight.
And I brought up the Marcio Alessandre fight that he had on The Ultimate Fighter. That was 6 years ago. He was 23 years old. And yeah, at the time, he gassed hard in the third round. In a 5-round fight still in 2020, I know Costa's fought a 5-rounder before, or sorry, he hasn't, I guess, so far in the UFC. But I definitely favor Adesanya in a longer fight, for sure. The stat that I really wanted to point out, and when you look on UFC stats, and we sometimes will say, well, you know, with 2 or 3 fights, you can account for this guy or this gal's percentage because of who they fought. Paulo Costa's fought decent talent so far. I mean, he's gone all the way from Gareth McLennan to Yoel Romero in 5 fights. He actually holds a UFC record right now as it stands. So for strikes landed per minute, at number 3, you have Leslie Smith at 7.56. You ever watch the Leslie Smith fight? They're actually really entertaining. Whether she wins or loses, she will throw the kitchen sink at you. Bellator's finest in the bantamweight division. At number 2, Justin Gaethje, 7.74. Well, that makes sense. Paulo Costa, 8.43. That's absolutely insane, and it's a stat that I'm sure they'll throw at you as well on the broadcast. Israel Adesanya, for as good as he is, doesn't actually hold any UFC records. He's not there at all. So interesting stuff there. In terms of overall numbers, the striking differential slightly lies with Paulo Costa. His absorbed per minute is way higher. So if his given is 8.43, absorbed per minute 6.84, that's not good. That's really going to favor Adesanya in this fight. He's a very elusive guy, even with the fights against Anderson Silva and against Kelvin Gastelum, which, listen, that Silva fight was probably closer than it really needed to be, or anybody probably wanted it to be. I know it was Adesanya's, idol and one of the reasons why he got involved in MMA, but it's not great. But it's absorbed per minute number 2.4 to 3.96 given. It gives him strike differential of 1.56. In terms of takedowns, I don't really see either of these guys going for takedowns. Take it for what it's worth. Paulo Costa actually has a tidy little jiu-jitsu belt hidden in his back pocket. And again, Adesanya with kickboxing, it's one of those things that a lot of people are going to favor him in striking over Costa for that reason. But you brought up a really good point as well. It's a combination to the power for Costa and the fact that he has that strange staying power, which you don't normally see it as somebody that's incredibly muscled up. And I know we've talked about it before where Tyron Woodley, he fought to keep his belt maybe. Look at how muscled up Tyron Woodley was when he was a champion through his time in Strikeforce and coming up. He was always heavily muscled, and it wasn't like cardio was ever that big of an issue for him. So Paulo Costa all of a sudden finds a little bit of success in that regard. So we've got 2 totally different strikers. We've got 2 totally different sets of strikes given to taken, this and that. And jiu-jitsu, probably just throw that one out the door. You have guys that are going to throw at each other. Do you see this as Paulo Costa closing the gap, landing, and winning that belt? Or do you see Adesanya stick and move, looking like a boxer, in and out, and really finding success that way?
So I think the storyline that a lot of people are trying to write is that Paulo Costa is just going to go out there, and if he wins, it's going to be this one-punch knockout. Paulo Costa doesn't really one-punch knock people out. Like, yes, he's big. Yes, he's strong. And he's a really good striker. But when you watch his fights, it's an accumulation. He fights in sort of that Max Holloway style. The terrifying thing
Johnny
is,
Hendricks fight.
Yeah, like he was just landing overhand right and overhand right after overhand right on Johnny Hendricks. And I'm sure he hits really hard, but it is more of a volume thing with Paulo Costa than it is just a pure outright power. Adesanya has Kevin Holland's another guy who reminds me of this. He's got that deceiving power because he's got like a whip to his punches. He catches people right on the end of them, and you can just tell that it's the accuracy and the timing that really play into his game more than just the brute force of, okay, I'm going to walk you down, throw as hard as I can, and in that chaos, I'll see what I can pull from it. Adesanya, I think, is too high level of a striker to be caught up in one of those kinds of wars with Paulo Costa. We saw the Robert Whittaker fight. I think Robert Whittaker technically he is better than Paulo Costa. We saw that in the Darren Till fight, just how high level sort of that kickboxing fight was. Robert Whittaker is almost impossible to outstrike. And Israel Adesanya just kind of went in there, downloaded everything Robert Whittaker was throwing at him, and just figured him out. And to beat someone of that caliber, and I hold Robert Whittaker really in high regard, if you can go out there and KO him, I don't see why you can't do the same to Paulo Costa. I think Costa leaves himself open to be hit. He's got a phenomenal chin. We saw that in the Yoel Romero fight. Yoel landed a flying knee. He landed massive shots on Costa. Costa just kept on moving forward. It's going to come down to cardio, though. And for as good of an output that Costa can keep up, I think he's going to really have to bring it back, pull those reins back, slow down a little bit and try to go strike for strike with Israel Adesanya. And then if you can hit him with a big shot that can wobble him, then sort of go for your combinations. If Paulo Costa kind of does what Justin Gaethje did, when Gaethje went from being that, I'm going to give one to land one, and now Gaethje's like, okay, I just hit harder than everybody. Why would I take all these unnecessary shots? If I'm just smarter, I can just go out there and one punch a lot of people. If Costa took that advice, like you had mentioned with Trevor Whitman, it would help him a lot moving forward because he has the skill set that, yes, technically he's probably not as good as Gaethje. He's not the wrestler. They have separate skill sets, but as just that brawling, move forward kind of guy, it is worth it to sort of down your output, up your power, and don't leave yourself open because you got to think every time you're throwing a strike, you're leaving a hand down to be hit. And I just think Adesanya is too high level. I've been going back watching a bunch of his kickboxing fights this week, and the fact that he's able to not only taunt but just like dismantle people and all they ever do is strike, it's really remarkable. So I don't know if anyone who is classified as a striker will be able to beat Adesanya at 185 for the time being.
And I mean, you look at the odds here. I'm actually surprised how close they are. Adesanya open a minus 140 favorite, now a minus 175. You look at Paulo Costa open as a plus 120, now at a plus 146. And if we go over on Tapology and look at the total votes, at a 1,200 exactly on the nose, 66% going Adesanya, 48% saying he's going to win by decision, 46% saying he's going to win by knockout, a slim margin saying he could submit Paulo Costa. I don't see that happening. I see Israel Adesanya holding on to his belt. Either a late TKO or more than likely a decision win for Adesanya. I think, again, the staying power is there. The proof's in the pudding in 5 rounders for Adesanya. We haven't seen it from Costa. We haven't seen him get overly tired in some time because normally he's just pummeling the F out of all of his opponents. But I see it in this fight. Yeah, Adesanya moving out of the way, dancing around, really doing a good job. And maybe there's a chance that he ends up having a fight where he's just there. Every time that Costa's not, Adesanya is there. He's hitting him with counters, and people might say at the end of the night, well, geez, that was a boring fight because you had one guy that looked like he wanted to engage and one guy that might not have. But I certainly see this the way of the champion. I think we're going to get an and still. Somebody's O has to go. I'm going to keep talking cliches. It's Paulo Costa's, but I think Adesanya keeps his belt here.
I'm going to agree with you. I do think Adesanya and still, but I don't see this being a boring fight. I thought that, yes, the Yoel Romero fight was awful, but I think that's such an outlier because, Yoel will play kind of that game. He'll do what no one thinks he will because it's kind of against the grain and because it's hard to call out Yoel Romero for not being active when he's kind of known for being in crazy fight after crazy fight. So you can't be too hard on the Adesanya Romero fight. It's hard for me to pick against Adesanya at this stage in his career. I think this is going to be the fight of the night, though, and I do think he's going to be able to get it done. I'll even go as far as to say he's going to win by stoppage. I know he's not a huge power puncher by any means, but I just think Costa, he leaves those openings available for a high-level guy like Adesanya to crack him. So I think Adesanya's going to be able to get it done. Phenomenal fight.
I'm really looking forward to this fight. We're both going with Israel Adesanya to get the win. It's a good card. It's a sneaky card. There's fights on here that name value-wise might not be the best in the world, but I think you're really going to enjoy it. So if you didn't get a chance to check out the playlist, go back through. We've got an extended look at Reyes and Blachowicz. We've got great previews in terms of some of those undercard fights. I'm really looking forward to Brad Riddell and Aleksa Silva. There's a lot of really good ones on there. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. Enjoy the week, enjoy the fights, and make sure you check out Question Mark Kicks because after weigh-ins, I get the chance to one-up Matt, but we go through the entire card top to bottom. Maybe something funky happened. Maybe we have fights pop in and out. Make sure you check that one out. And Matt, as we always say with Fight Night Picks, let's get into it.